Cheeseheads. Get on your feet. It's Curd and Long. Hosted by Sparky, Fifer, and Ryan Horvath.
Welcome in another edition of Curd and Long. Steve Sparky Fifer with you. Normally, Ryan Horvath of BetMGM tonight is here as well. However, he is still out sick. He's been battling it for the last week or so, but apparently his voice is starting to come back. So that's a positive sign. Joining us in his place, special guest co-host Jacob Westendorf. You can follow him on Twitter at Jacob Westendorf or X, whatever you want to call it nowadays. He's on the phone for the podcast today. And follow all of his great stuff over at si.com/NFL/Packers. Him and Bill Huber do a great job over there. So let's first start off, obviously, talking about this Green Bay Packers team, which I will tell you what my reaction was. You were up there at the game. I was on my couch, and I was pretty much laughing the entire first half by what I was watching from the Packers offense. I'm not sure if everybody in the press box's reaction, but mine was laughter.
It felt different than anything else that they've had I wasn't at the game in Detroit, so I didn't experience what that was like. But this felt like not quite, prime MVP level Aaron Rodgers type offenses, because they still had some self-destructions and weird penalties that ruined some stuff and kicked a couple field goals when they probably should have scored touchdowns. But it felt like, and this, make no mistake about it, this Chiefs defense is awesome. That is, for all the fanfare that Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce get and deserve, their defense is what has made them the best team in the AFC before last night's game. So they were able to move the ball pretty much at will against a really good defense. And what was it? They had 7 possessions and they scored on 6 of them or something, or 8 possessions and 6 scoring drives, something to that effect. It was incredible, and something I told you just before we started here, not at all what I would have expected to be having as far as a conversation if we had done this before the Chargers game.
See, my argument all year on this podcast with Ryan Horvath has been, yeah, you can be mad at Jordan Love, you can criticize Jordan Love, but it's, in my opinion, the whole time was kind of unfair because you had wide receivers that probably weren't doing the right things and not playing fast. You had tight ends that weren't doing necessarily the right things at times. You had a turnstile at left tackle and Rasheed Walker for a majority of the year. Runyon hasn't had a great year at right guard. Aaron Jones can't stay healthy. That's who this offense was built around in the offseason. There were so many things going against this offense by a person not named Jordan Love. To me, it was going to be very difficult to sit here and make a decision of, he sucks, he's not the guy, based on what was around him. And now as the season has gone on, even with Aaron Jones hurt yet again, you're seeing these young guys starting to play faster, understand where they're supposed to be, still making mistakes, but not as many maybe as they have in the past. And now this offense is being trusted more so by Matt LaFleur when he's calling these plays than maybe it was, 6-7 weeks ago.
Yeah, and like you said, you're watching that play out in real time now where guys are on the same page. Jordan Love talks about it after the Steelers game where they had that big play on the final drive to Jaden Reed where he and Reed saw the same thing. And he kind of threw one up and Reed knew where to go and ran under it. You're starting to see more stuff like that. Like for the big play to Dobbs last night. Yeah, it was kind of chuck and duck, but it was a play that I promised you 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago even, maybe before the Detroit game. That's picked off.
Yep.
And we're going what the heck was he even looking at or thinking or anything like that? Like you said, you're seeing it play out in real time. Nothing about Jordan Love's career has been fair. It's not fair to him that he came into a situation with a relatively toxic relationship between the general manager and the quarterback that was probably only made worse by his selection.
For sure.
Not fair that he had to wait for 3 years. That's just kind of the way that I guess his career is going to go. Nothing about it is going to be fair. And now you see what happens. He's holding the pen and he's writing his own story, which is kind of the coolest part of this season so far is they've overcome all that stuff and they've kind of overcome it together. It's not, you're not listening to the stories of being at odds or anything like that. You're just listening to, stories about how the team is growing instead of, Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. There's no question about that. But listening to the guys, the receivers who are at odds with each other, stuff like that, or the facial expressions or anything like that. It's been incredible. It's been fun to watch. And it's kind of the byproduct of a young team. The growing pains are what they are. And it seems like for now, at least, those are over.
It's funny. I heard Romeo Doubs after the game yesterday talking about Jordan Love and how, he's relatively quiet. He just wants to play football, go out there and win and so forth. And maybe it's not fair to Aaron Rodgers to make the following statement, but in my mind, I don't know if this would have went the same way had Rodgers still been here playing with all these inexperienced guys, because I think you could point at different instances where Rodgers absolutely has destroyed the confidence of a young player by dressing him down and doing what he does, or refusing to throw the ball to him again if they drop a ball. And I think you needed a guy with a ton of patience that was willing to kind of go through the growing pains of the young guys around him. And even though it was going to be at his expense publicly, while they try to figure it out, that's what makes this even better, I think, is the fact that Jordan Love is a patient guy, isn't, some vet that's been here 10 or 12 years and is going to scream his head off every time somebody runs a wrong route.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it would have been a completely different situation if Rodgers were here. But yeah, there's no way they would have built this team the same way they did a year ago, because you saw him go through those struggles last year, and that was even with guys that have played with him, guys he knows, guys he likes, guys he wants on his team with him, in his corner, or whatever phrasing you want to use. I mean, the one thing that you're saying on that kind of sticks out to me is last year, I remember it was a Monday night game against the Rams, and Watson had run clearly the wrong route, and he didn't score a touchdown on the play that he could have. And at the end of the game, Rodgers said something to the media about, if you want to score touchdowns, you run the right routes. And, he's right. But you're sitting there did you have to say that publicly? Could you have said that privately? I don't know. Like you said, Aaron Rodgers is great. It's probably not fair to him to have some of the criticisms that we had. But, I think even after a while as fans and media members and all this stuff, even, it even got a little stale for us watching and listening and hearing to the same stuff. Because the stuff we're saying now about Jordan Love is what was being said 15 years ago about Aaron Rodgers, the breath of fresh air, it's just so different without the stuff that Favre would do, or, things like that. So it's been interesting to kind of watch that growth pattern with the new quarterback.
Let's talk about Christian Watson. Last year, big drop, first play of the year, whatever the case may be, has issues, gets hurt, comes back, totally different player in the second half. Looks like he's a true one. We come into this year, hurt again. Comes back, struggles, so forth. Now it looks like he's finally kind of figured it out, turned it on, had his best game of the year yesterday, and hurt again. Christian Watson, when healthy, after he gets through his initial struggles, he looks like he can be, a star type wide receiver in the league. My thing just is, if you're the Packers, Reed's not a one, Dobbs isn't a one. I don't know if Wicks is necessarily a one. And you look ahead kind of at the draft and so forth. I just wonder if there is going to be temptation to take a wide receiver early in that draft, or if they're going to go in that draft saying, we're good, maybe I'll take one, 5th, 6th round or something like that. But we're not taking wide receivers early on. We like what we have.
Yeah, there's 5 more games or 6 more games or however many more they're fortunate enough to play if they keep winning that might decide that, as far as everything like that. The way that the weapon room is now, like I said, I think they have a lot of guys that are really nice pieces. I think Watson has a chance to be a star. And I think of the receivers that they have on the roster, that's the only one that has a chance to be a star.
Agreed.
Star. A true number one, to use the phrasing everyone likes to throw out there. So everyone else, I don't want to call them an upgradable piece because I think they're nice to have around, but you don't pass on they're not going to be able to draft Marvin Harrison, but, Marvin Harrison has a gas mask that comes out and that makes him look, drop way down in the draft. You don't pass on Marvin Harrison because you say, well, we got Romeo Dobbs, we're good there kind of thing. And that's not disrespectful to him either. That's just the nature of how it is. So I think they could use one more guy there. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like or who that's going to look like or anything like that, but it has been nice to see this group kind of grow together. But yeah, I mean, you can never have, you're kind of seeing in Kansas City right now, they have Travis Kelce and not a whole lot else. And even Patrick Mahomes can only make chicken salad out of what for so long.
Yeah, no doubt about it. What about the offensive line as this thing has played out throughout the year? What are your thoughts on what you've seen to this point? Because the last couple of weeks, I feel like maybe last 3 or 4 weeks, this offensive line is starting to protect a little bit better for Jordan Love.
Yeah, I think they're starting to get better. And you mentioned the turnstile at left tackle early in the season. That was a big deal. This team was built around David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins and trying to put that group on the left side line that lasted all of one game. That was the tough part, is then you're trying to adjust on the fly to not having an all-pro. And not only not having an all-pro, now it's you have a 7th-round pick that hasn't played a whole lot of football. I mean, that's tough to kind of work through and figure out your way through those things. So the Packers have been able to do that, and I think the biggest part of that is the improvement of what they've done. This weird rotation, which kind of started to see the end last night, I think. Yosh Nijman only played like 19% of snaps. Sean Ryan played one series. And you could debate whether he should play more or not. But at left tackle, I definitely think you should have a situation where, like, you're just one person. You plug him in there. If he plays 60 snaps, he plays 60 snaps. But that improvement from that group, it's still not great in the run game, but in the passing game, Jordan Love has a lot more time to throw the football.
What about the run game? Because the last time Aaron Jones was hurt, this offense was horrible. They couldn't figure it out. Now Aaron Jones is hurt, and A.J. Dillon looks like a completely different running back as far as, running over people far more now than he did earlier. And knowing that, look, there's a chance him and Jones may both not be back next year. We have no idea what that running back room will even look like. So maybe he's playing for a contract, maybe for somebody else next year if it's not necessarily here in Green Bay. But he's definitely one of those guys that you could say has had a huge upgrade over his performance from earlier in the year till now.
Yeah, he looked like a completely different player last night. It's nothing, nobody's going to compare him to Barry Sanders or Earl Campbell or somebody like that for 18 carries for 73 yards. But that's as good as he's looked all season long. And the Packers are going to need that. I mean, the run game is not going to be what it was last year. They were a top tier unit last year with Jones and Dillon and that offensive line as they gelled and everything like that. That's just not in the cards this year. Even when Jones has been around, they haven't been a very good rushing team. And I know that hasn't been a whole lot as far as Jones being able to play. But that's just how it is. During training camp, they put a lot of focus on building the passing game, and they kind of did that to some degree, I think, at the expense of the run game. But then you put A.J. Dillon in. For some reason, when the calendar turns to December, he looks like a different player. It's almost like something activates inside of him as saying, like, this is what I was built for. This is what I'm supposed to be. Now I'm going to run through these people. And last night, he certainly was doing that.
What about Matt LaFleur as a play caller? Early in the year, he took a lot of flack for his play calling. A lot of people saying, Aaron Rodgers covered up for him. Now we know why Rodgers wanted to have so much say in the play calling and so forth. And now, as LaFleur would put it in the press conference yesterday, he's become more aggressive with the play calling because, in all honesty, he trusts the offense more as far as the players playing it to do what they're supposed to do. You're seeing more or less what this offense is supposed to look like. And he looks like a pretty damn good play caller to me the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, last night was the culmination of that. I thought with all the motion, the plays off of plays, everything that they ran, I thought it looked like how it was quote unquote supposed to. And everybody, it's easy to say be aggressive and do all that stuff. It's hard to do that when your offense is struggling to pick up first downs and do anything with any sort of consistency, which they were early in the year. So it's kind of understandable to be more conservative. But I think they found an identity, and that identity is what it has been for 30 years. It's the right arm of the quarterback and throwing the ball. I think they were trying to protect him and maybe this young passing game early in the year, and they figured out pretty quickly, or at least through, trial by fire, if you will, that they can't do that now. It's not a dominant ground game. This isn't the 2021 Michigan Wolverines, for example, where it's line up and ram it down your throat, or the old school Wisconsin Badgers, since I guess I'm on a Wisconsin show. I should probably use that as an example instead. But you get those things all put together. Play calling is always easier when the stuff is working, right? Like, that's just kind of the nature of how it is. But I think they're doing better stuff to set up. And now as the players understand more of what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to be, they kind of know better as to now LaFleur can do some things that are better in that spot too. The
other thing that's happening is that there's a lot more misdirection going on with the reverses and double reverse that you saw last night with Christian Watson. That, to me, is a huge element of this offense, because even though you don't have a speed guy in A.J. Dillon, to be able to use a couple of those wide receivers like Reed or Watson to kind of show that speed to get to the corner is an element they desperately have to have, I think, to make this run game go.
Yeah, and you have to finesse it a little bit, because you can't just line up and run inside zone the way that they could have last year, or do some stuff with the outside zones that they were able to last year. They kind of have to have those, like you said, the jet sweeps, the reverses, all of that stuff to make some plays in the run game. Because, yeah, they can't get into a situation where it's just drop back passing for, 45, 50 attempts a game. That's not going to be a good situation for this team. They're not there yet. But what they're doing is they're testing the discipline of opposing team linebackers, opposing team second-level defenders, and trying to figure out what it is that they need to do to establish a better ground game. And I think that is certainly part of it. Jaden Reed has been a big part of this run game, especially in the last few weeks.
Let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. I saw you earlier today talk about it doesn't look like Joe Barry is going anywhere based on how this defense has played as of late. And with 5 games coming up against, average to below average teams, mostly below average teams. We'll call the Vikings average for the time being because they are 500 technically. But with that being said, unless something goes haywire here, Joe Barry is going to be back in Green Bay as defensive coordinator again next year, even though most fans don't want him.
Yeah, some of that I think is confirming a prior. Some of it is based in merit. I mean, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing defense. They still give up 1 billion yards on the ground.
Yep.
They still give up things a little too easily at times. Like, that stuff is true. It was a little funny watching last night everybody freak out as Travis Kelce is, like, wide open in the middle of the field. Like, how does he let that happen? Like, well, Travis Kelce does that against everybody. He's arguably the greatest tight end ever. Sometimes Joe Barry, I think, gets blamed for just about everything that goes wrong in Green Bay and maybe even the world's events as well. And how the Packers fans make those blames. So, I mean, I'm not advocating for him because I don't personally like the style of defense that they play. It's why I'm not a big fan of, like, when people say fire him and replace him with Brandon Staley. Well, why? You just want to play the same defense? That doesn't make much sense to me. But they've gone, I think Aaron Nagler tweeted today, they have under 24 points allowed in 8 straight games. It's their longest streak since 2010. I mean, that's good, whether, whatever way you want to put it or not. And I said today later, too, that I think if the prior or the general consensus was that Joe Barry was a good defensive coordinator, then the conversation surrounding what they've done with the turmoil in the secondary and the guys in and out of the lineup and stuff like that, I think it would be talked about a lot differently instead of, well, look at this number and look at these things. That's still not going well.
But I don't think people realize how difficult it is in the National Football League to lose your best corner for several games like they have with Jair Alexander, put inexperience out there like they have, and still be able to not only do your job, but put your team in a position to win without it becoming an eyesore at that next cornerback after Jair Alexander and Valentine. And plus you traded Rasul Douglas. Let's not forget about that either. People were losing their minds over that earlier. And this secondary with all of these different dudes have really stepped up to the plate and played a lot better than the guys that were playing earlier in the year.
Yeah, I mean, this is not meant to sound the way that it might, but like the reality is the reality. Corey Ballantyne was on the practice squad. Anybody could have picked him up and signed him to the active roster, and they didn't. Carrington Valentine was a 7th-round pick, and he's played really well. But he was still a 7th-round pick. I mean, anybody could have picked him for the first 200-some-odd picks and didn't. The way that they've been able to, like you said, Jair Alexander is an all-pro player. That is not an easy thing to just replace and plug and go. It's not like Madden where you're replacing a 94 with a 72.
Right.
Or something like that. That's not the way these things work. So Green Bay, I think, and the whole secondary, you mentioned Douglas being traded. Darnell Savage has missed most of the season. Rudy Ford's been in and out of the lineup. I mean, I don't think the only preferred starter in the defensive backfield that's playing every game is Keyshawn Nixon. And Nixon was a special teamer when they signed him. Like, his thing wasn't to come here and play defensive back. This wasn't some high-profile acquisition that they made. It was we want you to come here because Bisaccia, you can play special teams, and then they happen to fall into the fact that he's a really good kickoff returner. But he wasn't supposed to be a defensive back. That was a surprise to them and everyone else. And
the cool thing about Nixon is he gets that interception, and that I enjoyed him talking about their mannerisms film. I didn't know that was even a thing, to be honest with you. A mannerisms film that they watched, and he saw Mahomes do the thing that he saw on film, and they ran the play that he expected with the routes that he expected and got the pick. And then you see LaFleur afterwards in the locker room talking about, that was great, but the fact that he got swung on and didn't swing back at the running back, Pacheco for Kansas City was the most impressive thing. And in the National Football League or most walks of life, if somebody swings at you, the initial reaction is going to be to swing back. Now, I believe it was Ingabari came running over there and got him out of there before he had a chance to do anything. But that's pretty impressive because that would have been a big deal had he swung back and they both got 15 yards and both got kicked out of the game. That really could have changed the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I could have, and it was cool too. And my first impression of Keyshawn Nixon was seeing him at training camp last year, and it's him, and they were doing joint practice with the Saints. It's him and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson before he got traded to Philadelphia, just going back and forth. And Gardner-Johnson has that reputation as kind of that pest, the instigator, whatever. Nixon doesn't back down from stuff like that. And they kind of had to separate those two guys on the sideline because they thought it was going to become a thing. So LaFleur saying that, it's funny and also like not that surprising because Nixon kind of has that you swing, I'm going to swing. Like his first, like if that's your first reaction, my first reaction, like it's almost a subconscious reaction or whatever the comparison for that is. But he's been a big part of this team in this locker room. You can tell like the guys were really happy for him getting a game ball. That's his first interception at home. The crazy part was so of the active cornerbacks on Green Bay's roster, that is the first interception of that group that's in here. That is Green Bay's cornerback, first interception since Rasul Douglas. And they traded him at the end of October, early November, whenever it was. So hopefully that starts a trend of guys starting to get their hand on the ball a little bit more. But that was a cool thing to see. It was a culmination of film study and a guy having a chance to make a play.
And again, everybody was mad at Goody that he got a 3rd-round pick for Rasul Douglas, and it's a white flag, and what are they doing? They're quitting. They're really not going to give him any chance to win. And now by the time this regular season is done, not only is everybody going to have to owe Goody an apology, but it's going to look like a Swami move if this secondary continues to play this well without Rasul Douglas. Having said that, let's talk about the Packers front 7. How did you feel like they played yesterday? Obviously, stopping the run was an issue, but getting to Mahomes was something, but I think a lot of those were coverage sacks more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think you got to heat him up a little bit. You know, Lucas Van Ness is starting to make some plays. You can see, like, that sack was a long time coming from some other stuff that he's done over the last couple of weeks. Rashawn Gary's a star. Okay, Clark, that's a tough offense. The tackles stink in Kansas City. But the interior, that group with Joe Tooney and Creed Humphrey and those guys, it's really good. So asking for almost anything from the interior last night was going to be a tall order. So I thought the edge group played relatively well. You move Mahomes off his spot a little bit. If there's one thing that can make him kryptonite, or make him not look like Superman, I guess, is moving him around and having to make him like uncomfortable in the pocket. And I thought they did that relatively well, even if the sacks weren't like, oh man, that guy just whipped the tackle and took him to the ground, even though I think Van Ness did that a little bit. But I think the front is starting to heat up a little bit. They have 6 sacks in the last 2 games. They're going to face the Giants on Monday, who are just dreadful in pass protection. So they should have a good opportunity to put some stuff together there. After that, they play Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield, prone to getting hit a bunch. And then they'll play Carolina after that. And then Minnesota. Minnesota's the best offensive line they'll face between now and the end of the season. But this defense as a whole, and this is true of almost any defense, when you can get pressure with 4, it's a lot easier because you have 7 on the back end. The most they could throw out in a pattern is 5. So, I mean, that's a lot to work in your favor. And, the New York Giants won 2 Super Bowls by playing, it might be called vanilla, but it really is as simple sometimes as being able to rush with 4 and cover with 7.
Yeah, they had 4 really good pass rushers on that Giants team for those couple Super Bowls. And it's interesting because Tyrod Taylor looks like he might very well be active and ready to go by Monday night for the Giants instead of good old Tommy DeVito. So that'll be a nice little shot in the arm for the Giants, and hopefully the Packers will be good to go on the road Monday night. I put it on Twitter after Carlson hit that field goal at the end that I had little faith that he was actually going to make that field goal. In fact, I was more concerned that it was going to get blocked and picked up than I was of him actually making that field goal. How much confidence, honestly, did you have that he was going to hit that thing?
None. He had missed a kick in every game, and the only game he didn't miss a kick since the bye was against Minnesota. And there's kind of an asterisk next to that because he missed a kick, but Minnesota was called offside, so he got a mulligan.
Right.
And then kind of snuck the second kick in there. So when Love took the sack, I was like, oh my gosh, like you just made a long field goal longer. You're going to ice the kicker, your own kicker, because you're going to call the timeout to make sure that, he's not rushed into kicking or whatever. But that was a big thing. The Packers, for as much as they talked about having their face rewarded with the quarterback, and that makes sense. Of course, the quarterback is much more important than the kicker. They have been very vocally supportive of Anders Carlson all season. And that is a patience that paid off for them on Sunday night. And maybe it'll be something that pays off long term. We saw with Anders' brother that Mike Zimmer cut him after 2 games, and now he's one of the best kickers in football. So I think that's what the Packers are hoping for. But, yeah, I'd be lying if I said I thought he was going to drill that kick right down the middle like he did last night.
Packers got 5 games left against, as we said, all teams they should beat outside maybe the Vikings that are 500 like the Packers are now. So maybe you look at that as a coin flip. I don't know. But my fear is here, Packer fans, and I can see it on social media, they're going to run the table. They're not going to lose again. And that type of stuff, I am telling you, don't do it. Don't fall into that trap, man. Don't do it. This is not a veteran-laden offense at this point with Rodgers and a bunch of vets around him that know how to deal with this. And it was brought up to LaFleur after the game on Sunday as well, which is how do they handle success without overlooking games? And I think there's going to be at least one time, maybe more, where they're going to overlook somebody and they're going to struggle and they're going to lose a game that they should win. I don't know if it'll be the Giants or if it'll be somebody else, but this is, again, a very young squad, and it may be that immaturity, whatever, they may bite them in the behind once they start feeling themselves a little bit here.
And call it a trap game, call it whatever you want. But I think the Giants having that extra rest coming off the bye week, and combine that with the Packers having maybe the biggest win of this, core's careers, that could be something that happens. And, it's kind of funny because we keep saying, oh, it'll be a roller coaster. The team will have ups and downs and all that stuff. Well, then when they went 2-1, we started talking about, well, could they win the NFC North? Can they win 12 games? Could they be 6-2 with the bye week, or, whatever that would have ended up being? There's downs that come with ups when you say there's going to be ups and downs. And I don't think the downs are necessarily over. Now, that being said, they should win 4 of the next 5 at least. The only game that in theory should be a toss-up is Minnesota in Minnesota because it's on the road. But the other teams, they are better than them. But, Kansas City is better than Green Bay, and Green Bay just beat them last night.
It's funny because I see on social media, Steve Palazzolo from Pro Football Focus tweeted out last night, the Packers are the first, quote, don't want to see them in the playoffs, end quote, team of the season. And seemingly before the game, everybody on TV picked the Packers to lose that game. Literally every analyst NBC had picked against the Packers. The game gets done, and then you go to NFL Network, Maurice Jones-Drew and those guys, and you start flipping around, and now everybody, because the Packers technically are in the playoffs as of today as the 7th seed, now everybody's like, oh, they're definitely going to be in the playoffs now. Like, there's no question about that, and maybe some teams should be a little worried about having to deal with the Packers in the playoffs. How different it is after one single football game is played. They didn't change their opinion after 5 or 6 weeks. They literally all spun on one outcome of one game, Jacob.
Yeah, albeit a very, very big one. Beating the defending champions with Andy Reid. And again, I know this isn't the peak form of the Kansas City Chiefs, but that is still a very good team. And the Packers, even after they beat the Chargers, it was, okay, so they're 4-6. They're going to play the Lions on the road, and then they're going to play the Chiefs at home. They're probably going to be 4-8. And then we're talking about, if they can steal one, then this or that. Well, now they just won both. So I do think that those conversations, maybe this is a culmination of everything finally coming together for this Packers team. But it is always a little bit funny, yes, to see, nobody thought the Packers were going to win that game. And if somebody did pick Green Bay that was an expert, please let me know who that was, because I didn't see anybody do it. And then after the game is over, yeah, you're like, well, they're definitely going to be in the playoffs. Could they make some noise? Could they beat San Francisco in San Francisco? That is way putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion. But yeah, I do think that it's fair now to say the expectation for this team, when you came into the year, it was, whatever happens, happens. No expectations. Now I think the expectation does have to be make the playoffs. And that doesn't mean they're going to win a game. That doesn't mean they're going to play to go to the Super Bowl. That doesn't mean they're going to beat the Cowboys or some really good team in the NFC like that. But I think making the playoffs is a fair expectation at this point, and that's how it should be. That's what the Packers have played themselves into, and that's a good thing.
They make the playoffs with, say 10 wins. Let's say it's 10 wins. They make the playoffs, and let's say they get bounced right away and they get beat in the first round of the playoffs. What's the pay going to be like for Jordan Love? Like top 12? Something like that, somewhere in that area as far as where he gets paid among the scale of quarterbacks on a new deal, because clearly if they make the playoffs his first year, they're going to have to give him a long-term extension this summer and try and get out in front of it as much as they can. They can't go into next year in a lame duck year having not extended him.
No, that was always going to be the case. They were always going to have to make that decision after this year. And even if that doesn't feel like a fair thing, teams just don't do lame duck quarterbacks that often, if at all. So I think you're right. Personally, I think that decision's made, unless Jordan Love just has absolute worst quarterback in football over the last 5 games, terrible, and assuming everything else around him stays relatively the same. then I think that's something that maybe could change their opinion. But I mean, the guy just went into Detroit and beat the Lions there, played lights out doing that, and then outdueled Patrick Mahomes and played a really good game against a really good defense. And the team, you could tell, and you could tell this early in the year, even when they were losing. I said this a bunch, from an intangible leadership, not production on the field type standpoint. Jordan Love had everything you could want in terms of a franchise quarterback. They just needed that production to be on the field for any of that to matter, because there are quarterbacks teams believe in, but aren't good enough. You know, with all due respect to Geno Smith in Seattle, that team sounds like they believe in him, but he's not good enough to win a championship with them. Is Jordan Love? I don't know, but I definitely think he's good enough to be a team's long-term starter at this point, and can get better to the point where you feel like, yeah, they can win a championship with him. Yeah, I think that is where he's at right now.
Think about this. He, according to Spot Track, he's at 13.5 million average, right, at 20th. Then Garoppolo is 24.25. That's 19th. Geno Smith, Ryan Tannehill, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers is 13th at 37.5. And then you get to Jones at 40 million. Whew. Stafford and Prescott. So where does he come in? Does he come in at somewhere between like 30 and 35 million, somewhere in the between Tannehill and Jared Goff, and puts him somewhere around 16th or 17th in average salary going forward?
Maybe even higher than that.
Really?
Today suggests Patrick Mahomes at 45 mil average per year. I mean, that's just
wow.
You know, it's kind of what the market and everything decides. And teams around this league are starved for quarterback play. Jimmy Garoppolo, probably not a fair comparison for someone like Jordan Love, because we know what he is. He's a journeyman. He's got the 49ers tried to replace him like 3 separate times, and then they finally did. So they let him go to Oakland or Las Vegas and do that thing out there with them. But yeah, I mean, I've always erred on the side of more expensive for quarterbacks. Quarterbacks aren't cheap, man. And that's why when Aaron Rodgers would get his deals when he was in Green Bay, and everyone would be like, oh, is that a lot? Or, you know, what's that going to be? It's like, well, yeah, of course it costs a lot. There's nothing in sports more valuable than a franchise quarterback. They get paid accordingly. That's just how it works.
He is Jacob Westendorf. Check out all of his great work along with Bill Huber. Follow him on Twitter at Jacob Westendorf, SI.com/NFL/Packers, Packers Central. Go check it out over there. And of course, you can download this fine podcast, Curd and Long, on your Odyssey app, or wherever you download your favorite podcast at, Spotify, Apple, wherever it may be. Plus, you can also watch the videos up at the Odyssey Sports YouTube page, where we normally will stream these live, unless, of course, I'm doing a solo show, in which case we don't do that. Thank you so much, Jacob Westendorf, and we will talk again down the line. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks, Sparky. You have a good rest of your day.